Friday, February 3rd. Chair of the committee, Mitchell Englander, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Paul Krikorian and Dennis P. Zine, with his new haircut. We are going to go ahead and start the meeting. First, on item 1, Mr. Clerk.
Yes, sir. Item 1, see a report relative to the costs incurred by the City of Los Angeles for staff salaries, overtime, and other expenses related to the Occupy LA protest pursuant to motion Englander, Parks, Krikorian, Zine.
I understand from PD that they're still putting this information together. I don't know if there's anybody here to speak to that real quickly, but we'll go ahead and table it for the next public safety meeting. But if you have an update that they're still putting the information together, Harry? Yeah? Okay. So for those listening at home, there was a nod of the head. And we'll go ahead and record that as such and table it for the next meeting, unless my colleagues have any further questions on it immediately. Oh, yes.
Good morning, Leo Martinez, Bureau of Sanitation. I did turn in a report last week that clearly outlined sanitation's expenditures for Occupy LA. I'm not sure if I need to be back here next week or not.
No, we got that. I appreciate that. So we'll go ahead and add that to the file.
Very good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We're just waiting for PDs. All right. Item number 2, Mr. Clerk.
Item 2, motion Englander, Zine, Garcetti, directing the CLA in consultation with the City Attorney, the Personnel Department, and other departments as necessary to report relative to the city's current disciplinary system, especially as it relates to the statute of limitations and the changes necessary to make the statute of limitations on disciplinary actions commence with the discovery of the act in question as opposed to the commission of the act itself.
Great. And do we have anybody from the department to speak up on this yet before we go to speaker cards? Anybody from City Attorney's Office?
Mr. Chair, John Deering with the CLA. The Fire Department was asked to give a brief presentation to speak to this item.
Okay.
I believe they're here.
Good morning, Councilmember Trevor Richmond, Planning Section Commander. The Fire Department is working internally right now to develop language that would amend 1060 to reflect more accurately AB 220, which is the Firefighter Bill of Rights with regard to statute.
Okay, can you fill us in, just give details on exactly what all that means so everybody understands it?
Okay. Right now, 1060 statute basically states that from 1 year from the department's discovery of the act or 2 years from the act of occurrence, that's 1060. AB 220 says 1 year from the discoverance of, or the actual discovery of the act. So we're looking to align 1060 with AB 220 to make it 1 year from the discovery.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been obviously a lot of disciplinary actions, and you have one system versus PD having another system. So if you can explain the differences between the two.
I'm not familiar, Councilmember, with the police system. I could report back to you.
We've got somebody here that is.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Good morning, Council Member. My name is Paul Hayashida. I'm Chief Special Investigator for the LA Fire Department's Professional Standards Division. We're only speaking as to the Fire Department's statute because ours is covered under a separate section than PD. PD is under Charter Section 1070. Our issues, as Chief Richmond stated, have to do with the difference between the Firefighter Bill of Rights enacted in 2008 and the fact that it has a separate statute of limitations formula than the existing charter section 1060 as it stands. And operationally, it causes difficulties for the fire department to have to deal with these two separate statutes. So we do know that the police department did amend 1070 and their charter statute of limitations scheme after their Peace Officer Bill of Rights was enacted because of those differences. We're just attempting to do the same thing for the fire department.
Okay, so basically, as I'm reading the report here, it basically says here, and there's inconsistencies, and that's why we're looking at modifying this, and there's been a lot of discussion over the years on this, but basically, and if I just read the paragraph that says, under the Charter of the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, state law, disciplinary actions for sworn members of the police department must commence within 1 year of discovery of the misconduct. So that's of discovery. The Charter provides the disciplinary actions for sworn members of the fire department must commence within 1 year of discovery of misconduct, no later than 2 years from the date of the act itself. However, the requirement contained in the Firefighter Bill of Rights, which was enacted into state law by AB 220, as you stated, in 2007, provides for discipline within 1 year of discovery of misconduct. So this would bring it more in line and give the opportunity from the date of discovery rather than the incident from what I've read here. Is that correct?
That is correct, and there's one other caveat between the Charter and the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, the Firefighter Bill of Rights also contains what's known as tolling provisions. Tolling provisions allow the department to stop that 1 year period if certain outside events occur. And where we encounter that the most is where the member that is being investigated by the fire department is also being looked at criminally by law enforcement and or the prosecutor's office. Or if there's concurrent civil litigation arising from the same incident. And there are a lot of public policy and operational reasons why you would not want the administrative case necessarily to move forward while these other inquiries are going on. So the Bill of Rights in the government code has these tolling provisions in it. The problem is that because there are no tolling provisions in the city charter, we are still forced to move along.
Right, so we'd have to amend it to allow that. So the problem that I have is every time we go into closed session and we are settling millions of dollars and we ask about the statute of limitations and what we're being done, it's because of this statute of limitations has always run out, or there's nothing we can do because of it was when the incident occurred rather than when discovery started. And there's never an opportunity to go after those that incurred either the civil or criminal liabilities because of it. And so I would like to move this forward, but first let me turn it over to my colleagues to ask questions.
Well, this came about as a result of some cases within the fire department. And while we have a fire department that is of high standard, professional, sometimes things occur with an individual within the fire department, as in the police department, as in the school teachers, which creates this uproar, and the conduct is not in line with what the professional standards of the firefighters. I know that some incidents that have been brought to the public arena have been an embarrassment to the fire department, and I think this is a result of trying to bring it in line, not to show disrespect to the hard work of firefighters, but when people commit certain acts, criminal acts, there's got to be some consequences. And I would say that with this particular situation, what we find is it brings a matter.
The cell phone matter's next, actually. Pardon me? No, go on.
I know. That brings the matter forward to make sure that we've got the consistency to maintain the public trust and integrity of the department and the good members of the department. So I think that if those situations hadn't been brought to light, maybe we wouldn't even be discussing this, but situations did come to light. They were in the public arena, and people are asking that we hold people accountable and responsible. So I think in light of that technical issue, where the time we find out, the time it occurred, this falls in line with the police department standard, which is, I think, what the public demands, is that we hold them accountable, responsible, and we maintain the public trust. So I would support it. I know that there's the tradition, but there's been some situations that really highlight why this is necessary. So I would go
Thank you.
along with that.
The other part of this, though, let me just remind the committee and those who are in the audience as well and listening, is that the motion asks for a 45-day report back to council on how we would implement, and if I just refer to this, would require to make the statute of limitations on disciplinary action commences with discovery of the act in question, but it's a report back to council on how we would implement if we did make those changes, not to make changes necessarily. So we have plenty of opportunity, and I believe this also went to Personnel Committee, but I'd like to move forward on getting the 45-day report back so we can look at what we would be doing and move that report to council so we can, and at that point, or it actually should probably come back here first once we have the report, and then go to council. So I'd like to move forward in 45 days. It actually says from the date of the motion, but we'll go ahead and let me know how long would it take to bring that back to committee now, to put the report together. You're going to need the report for personnel as well, should we decide to move forward with the change on what it would take to implement that change.
That 45 days should be sufficient.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and take that action if the rest of the members, unless anybody else has any questions.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I'm going to do that next. I'm not going to move the item yet. I got one speaker card.
so as I understand it, there's not the change that we're discussing here is not actually a part of this motion. This is simply a report back to hear what sorts of changes would need to be implemented in order to bring consistency.
That is correct.
Okay, because I still have a number of questions about the underlying policy and its history, and why the 2-year hard statute is present. I'm sure there's a history there that I'd like to be included within such a report, because we really need to understand the context of this. I think, if somebody, Mr. Zine mentioned criminal actions, but this would, I imagine, encompass all disciplinary proceedings, wouldn't it? I mean, not just criminal actions, but this would mean that somebody could look back to the beginning of a firefighter's career and dredge up things that might be construed as conduct unbecoming, or, any other basis for a disciplinary action that might have happened 8 or 10 or 15 years prior, if we don't have this statute, right? So, given the fact that in the criminal law, if somebody commits an armed robbery on the street and no one discovers it until after the statute of limitations passes, we can't prosecute that armed robber because the statute is passed. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that you want to be able to have fresh evidence. You want to be able to have witnesses who recall the incident and can testify according to their recollection. You want to have an incentive on the part of law enforcement, or in this case, management, to actually be diligent in discovering wrongdoing. So I think we may be trying to find a solution to a problem that I haven't heard yet, and so I'm a little concerned about that. I'm fine with a report back. It will come back here, Mr. Chair?
Yes, it will.
Would come back here and then to council. I never have an objection to hearing reports back. I love reports. But
Yeah, so with that,
sorry, staff. But I do have significant concerns about the underlying implications of the policy change.
So with that, and you'll be hearing now on the Budget Committee often, and it'll give you that full circle, not only historical perspective, but as we're settling these lawsuits, you'll often hear in closed session that there's nothing that can be done in terms of, because of the Bill of Rights and the statute of limitations in terms of promotions and things like that. That's usually typically the questions we'll ask is whatever happened to that individual. They were promoted, they continue to be promoted, or whatever might happen because the statute of limitations had run out, even though we had just discovered the issue. And so that's what sort of brought this on. With that, I want to go ahead and amend the instruction then for the fire department to report back with the recommendations to amend the city charter, conform the firefighter Bill of Rights with the history as well, as Mr. Krikorian asked for. But before we vote on that as a committee, we do have one speaker card from Mr. Pat McCosker, if you can come on up.
Thank you.
2 cards.
Oh, 2 cards.
Good morning, committee members. Pat McCosker, President, United Firefighters. Thanks for taking this up today. I
Frank Lima.
find it interesting. I know for one thing that this really came to light as before us because of the misdeeds of a fire chief, actually. So what we have, unfortunately, is another situation where management has done something that, could now result in serious impacts on protections for rank-and-file firefighters. I have a problem with this on 2 levels. I think this is the wrong way to go about this one change, one thing at a time, and because of the merits also of making the change, which Mr. Krikorian just spoke to. Let me just say this. I am the father of the Firefighter Bill of Rights in California. That was my idea. That law exists because I thought we should have that. I took Speaker of the Assembly to lunch about a mile from here and asked her to author that bill for us. So I find it, interesting that anyone would come before you and say, we have to get in line with the Firefighter Bill of Rights. That law established minimum protections for firefighters throughout the state of California in places where they had none. And they specifically said, as they debated that bill, and it's part of the legislative record, that where greater protections exist for firefighters, those are not being usurped by this. Those protections still exist, and it exists for us in the Charter. We should continue to we should be having a discussion right now about how to strengthen the protections for police officers. I completely understand the need for equity between police officers and firefighters, and I hope I have just a little bit longer to speak on this. But we should be sitting here talking about why we shouldn't have a better statute of limitations for charges against police officers. Remember, it's a preponderance of evidence that we're convicted by in the disciplinary arena, not beyond a reasonable doubt. And so, as Mr. Krikorian said, when 10 years later, one employee who's competing with another for a promotion, say, claims that he or she did something against them 10 years ago, now memories are gone, witnesses are lost, evidence no longer exists, and on a preponderance of evidence, somebody says, yeah, that's right, we're going to convict you of that, alleged infraction. So that's not right, and we need to have appropriate laws. But I really object to the way that we're going about this. First of all, it will take a charter change, so what you're all discussing is whether or not to put that on the ballot. By the way, you just had that discussion in full council probably 6 or 8 months ago before you put a round of changes on the ballot, and I
don't want to cut you off. We've got a lot to go over and out of time, but I do want to say that you'll have plenty of opportunities to weigh in. We're only asking at this point for report back. It may or may not necessarily require a ballot change. Not all charter changes do, so we'll ask that the city attorney weigh in on the report.
Mr. Chairman, we're looking for comprehensive reform that improves the disciplinary
With all
system,
due respect,
not one cut at a time.
We can't have a dialogue during public comment. That's unfortunately not allowed, but you know that. I'm always reachable and accessible, and so happy to discuss this offline as well, but let's try to keep it in committee. But we do have an opportunity where it's going to come back, it's a report back, and it's still in personnel, so I appreciate that. And then the next one, Frank Lima.
Yes,
He's
sir.
got comments as well.
The Honorable Public Safety Committee, Frank Lima, Vice President of UFLAC. And we're here in opposition to 1060, specifically A, as an atom, on the change of the statute of limitations. The charter was Charter 1060 was rewritten approximately year 2000. And going back on some of the history and the intent of that was to add the 2-year drop-dead rule. Now I heard some discussion earlier about, hey, it's different in AB 220 and it's different in 1060. That's absolutely false. They're both, once the department discovers the act, they have 1 year to file charges and finish the investigation. With the caveat being that 1060 gives us greater protection and there's a drop-dead 2-year standpoint. And that goes on to the intent of preventing wind shuts. Going back to Controller Chick's audit, she brought it up with several of these lawsuits that the diligence of the fire department wasn't there. There's no urgency, and these things need to be over and done with. There's a legal term used called latches, and that's when key witnesses are gone, retired, evidence is missing, and we're supposed to be getting facts in these investigations. I want to reiterate, we have a tremendously well-disciplined fire department. I can't even remember when the last Board of Rights was, whether it was member opted or department mandated. In regards to the lawsuits and the 7-figure payouts that have been discussed, really none of them have anything to do with the statute of limitations. It has to do with managers not treating and handling cases well. And I mean, we're going to go back after these chief officers. There's a cost factor. And just, we're here in strong opposition. We could give a lot more facts to back it up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so the action by the committee that I would recommend is that we go ahead and once again, to reiterate it, as we look back at a report, to come back here in 45 days and include the history and the element of that as well as the city attorney's portion of that report to include the process to which we would be required to make those changes. And that would be my recommendation from the chair. So moved? Okay. Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay, moving on. Next item, Mr. Clerk.
Item 3, motion Labange Garcetti, instructing the CLA, the police and fire departments, and the Department of Transportation to report, along with representatives from the National Transportation Safety Board, on the feasibility and the impacts on implementation of a complete cell phone ban while driving.
All right. And who do we have to report back on this item?
Mr. Chair, I can speak to that. John Deering with the CLA. Our office did some brief research on the topic. The motion speaks to proposed ban from the National Transportation Safety Board for a national ban on cell phone use while driving. As you know, California currently has a ban on cell phone use, which also includes texting. The difference between what the NTSB recommended and what California currently has is the NTSB also recommended a ban on hands-free devices as well. California is only one of 13 states that has this type of ban. So given that this is a legislative issue, we recommend instructing our office to continue monitoring legislation that may affect the current ban in California. And we will also follow up separately with Councilman Labange's office to determine if they wish to pursue a resolution.
So one of the things that's unique about Los Angeles, and particularly in California, is we're car dependent. And driving a vehicle to get from point A to point B in LA is critically important because the public transportation system certainly has not been built out as it needs to be. And a lot of people have long commutes as well. And if you don't have a long commute, you're sitting in traffic otherwise. But with that, I know there's been a lot of studies from a lot of different entities, some pointing to the fact that it's simply safer, period, not to be talking on the phone at all. And some suggesting that if you're on a hands-free device, that it's much safer as if you had passengers in the car. And that could be disputed by different organizations, certainly different experts. And in looking at a lot of those reports, trying to determine what is the best thing to do. Now, I look at this as this is really a state issue. From that perspective, under our purview, just to ban something in the city of LA probably makes no sense. Whether we support by resolution, though, however, something like this, if it were to come, another law as an AB 82 were to come through the legislature, certainly the city should weigh in on issues like that, particularly as it pertains to public safety. So I'd like to have the CLA continue to monitor any proposed legislation. The fact that my own daughter just got her driver's license, and her car came with a Bluetooth device built in. She's not allowed to use it at all, because when you're a minor, you can't even talk hands-free in the state of California, and it's something that I support. There's also applications that you can download on your cell phone and your children's cell phone that it shows if you're moving at a particular speed, it cuts the device off completely, unless just for 911 and emergency calls to go through, and it gives that allowance for those. So with that, I suggest that we take your recommendation, continue to monitor the state legislation. One of the things that asked for in the motion as well is the number of citations that LAPD is putting out there now, and I don't know if we've got those numbers yet, looking at the number of citations for people holding hands-free devices. I know that Mr. Labange is very interested in that information, so if we could have the police department report back to him directly, and any other council members at that point that wish to have that information on the number of citations that are being issued for folks that are not utilizing hands-free devices in the city of Los Angeles required under state law, that would be helpful. But at this point, I'd go ahead and make the recommendation that we do receive and file this, but that we continue to monitor any state legislation and bring that back to the council if there's proposed changes in Sacramento on this. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they've got any questions. Okay, so we'll go ahead and make the recommendation to receive and file this and monitor state legislation and bring that information back as well. Thank you. Next item.
Item 4, motion Koretz-Englander, instructing the fire department with the assistance of the city attorney to report relative to brush clearance requirements, the appropriate equipment for brush clearance to maximize safety, use of fire extinguishers or other fire retardant to ensure that fire could be immediately contained or prevented, and recent changes in the very high fire hazard severity zones boundary.
Okay, how you doing?
Morning.
Morning, and good morning. We're now joined by another colleague, Councilwoman Jan Perry. Good morning. We're on item 4, brush clearance.
Chief of Park Industrial Commercial Section, Fire Prevention Bureau, and we got Captain Knight in charge, Robert Knight, in charge of the brush clearance unit. This item we addressed quite a while ago. I believe it was about a year and a half ago. And what we did is we found that it wasn't the best way to handle by making fire code changes, but what we did is recognize that we could provide some safety tips for the homeowners. So in that, we provided safety tips that are posted on our website that has access for everybody. And also, every year, we mail a pamphlet that we're getting ready to do again this year before the start of our brush season. And in that pamphlet, on the very last page, we've added those very same safety tips that this gets addressed to everybody that lives within the zone. So with that, I think it's the best way to handle it. It addresses the having a water source available and if you're doing any work out there. Talks about the heat of the day, what the best times are to do some work, properly maintained equipment, not to use any spark-producing equipment, things of that nature. So it also gives a reference to our website that can go on, or a number that can call for any guidance or questions that we could answer.
Okay, with that, we inspect, 130, 150,000 of these every year citywide?
132,000, which now has increased to approximately about 179,000 with the new map that we've adopted.
And have we had incidents that have ironically caused fires while they're clearing the brush? That have sparked fires, the equipment, while they're actually clearing the brush to prevent fires?
Yes, Robert Knight, Fire Department from the Brush Clearance Unit. Yeah, we have been, historically, there has been some issues where fires have been started by actual homeowners or grounds workers actually performing brush clearance themselves. Many times it's an accident by faulty equipment or using weed whackers in areas where there's debris and striking an object, causing a spark, and also starting the fire that way. So we determined that there would be the best suited is that we would provide these safety tips and to give the property owner a way that they can actually, look at their own equipment and be able to prevent these fires as well. Now, the brush clearance unit has approximately 17 qualified brush clearance contractors. In order to enforce that, we annually inspect all their equipment, their vehicles, to make sure that they're in compliance.
Okay, and with that, you suggested that there be a water source available while they're performing the functions. What about any other fire retardants or extinguishers or anything on hand? Is that required, or should it be required?
On the safety tips, yes.
Those are on the safety tips as well?
Yeah, if it says always have a water source readily available, water extinguisher, garden hose, or a few buckets of water.
And the safety tips, are these printed in different languages?
Currently, right now, it's only in English.
Only in English, yeah.
Okay. And the majority of the people that are doing the work, are they the majority of them English speaking and English reading?
Yeah, we would probably say that the majority of them probably was Spanish speaking, but we were providing that for the property owners who would be reviewing the website. The website is only currently for English speaking as well, but that's something that we need to be looking at.
I know it's not part of the motion. I was just sitting here thinking about it. So what I would suggest is to put those out in various languages, particularly to the audience that we may be communicating these tips with. And then how are we distributing this information? I mean, if it's on a website, I don't know that most people who have gardening equipment, if they're hired subcontractors or contractors or gardeners or whoever those might be to be clearing brush, are necessarily going to the LAFD website tips for while clearing brush in English to figure out if their equipment is safe.
We addressed it two ways. One was to put it on our website so that the public can have access to if they like. But what we also did is we provide a pamphlet with the information that goes out to every property within the zone. So if we're talking 132,000 parcels or 179 now, they're all going to get this information. So every property owner, so if they go out and do it themselves, or if they hire somebody, they have the information on the very last page that provides the safety tips.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out another way to be proactive in this. First of all, my suggestion would be to, at a minimum, add that to in Spanish as well, at a minimum, if not other languages, get an idea of who these folks are, and so we can communicate with them a little better, and so we can prevent these issues from occurring, and then look at another means of distributing them. If they're in a pamphlet and they're buried on the back page in 10-point type in English only, doesn't seem like a great way to get the information out there to the right audience. I would assume that, and I'm going to take a leap here, that if a homeowner or a property owner is hiring somebody for the brush clearance, that they're not giving them the pamphlet and telling them to follow the safety rules, and they're assuming that whoever they're hiring is taking this, would already be privy to that, and in fact they're taking a risk of losing their property when they're trying to prevent a fire. And so if there's another means, perhaps at gardening centers, places where this equipment is sold, other options, I would look at that and strongly suggest we look at distributing that information in that venue as well. And then with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to any of my colleagues for questions. Okay, we'll go ahead and receive and file that, and if you could follow up, though, if you would, with since this was Mr. Koretz's motion, and let him know what changes for distribution and perhaps multiple languages and how you'll be distributing it, so you can keep him informed. I would appreciate it. Yes, sir. Thank you. Mr. Clerk.
Item 5, Board of Police Commissioners report relative to the fiscal year 2011-12 expenditure plan for the Police Department's supplemental police account 15. There was a speaker's card number 4, Mr.
Yes. Janet Turner, please. And then before, well, why don't you come on up? You're already walking up. Have a seat, absolutely, and then we'll call up the department and ask them about the account in detail. Morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, council members, and thank you especially, Chair Englander, for wanting to find a creative solution.
And if you could just say your name for the record so we have it on.
Janet Turner, President, Pacific Palisades Community Council. I'm here also on behalf of Brentwood Community Council, and I don't see my colleague from the Hillside Association, who also passed a motion last night supporting the Koretz motion. Last fall, a fire erupted in the city's Potrero Canyon project site. It was due by workers who were engaged by the city. It ran up the canyon walls into the neighborhoods. Fortunately, it was a red flag day, and so we had our full fire complement. This brought to our attention that not only is the Koretz motion needed for homeowners, but it is also needed for construction equipment used by homeowners and contractors and city crews. And again, I just spoke to my friends in the fire department who explained that this is difficult for them to enforce. But it seems to me that if it was on the books, one thing is that perhaps when inspectors did come out for permitted projects, they could see if the workers do have fire extinguishers there. That might be one way. Also, if a fire did break out and this was on the books with fine attached to it, homeowners might be more inclined to say to their contractors, are you going to make sure you will be bringing fire extinguishers as compared to receiving a $500 or $1,000 fine when something would break out. We live in a very high fire zone, as does Brentwood and the whole Hillside Association. We had 30% of our fire force cut because of the budget cuts. We really need you to be creative in coming up with ways to prevent a fire in our area. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that, and under time as well. I want to thank you for coming downtown on this, and this is critically important, as well as I suggested. It didn't make any sense to me that they're putting information to homeowners on the last page in one language And as they stated, that the bulk of the folks that are actually performing the work aren't even perhaps English speaking, and so the information isn't even getting to them. And so they made a commitment to change that. I think that's critically important, and I appreciate that you came down to the committee as well. So thank you. Okay, item 5. Item 5, if there's anybody here from the police department to speak on the supplemental police account, some of the details on the expenditures. We can go ahead and take item 5, 6, and 7 together. They actually have to deal with the SBA account and forfeited assets trust fund as well. And so we'll group those items together unless there's any council members that wish to separate them. Morning.
Morning.
You can walk us through these reports. One of the questions that I had on the supplemental police account, item 5, was that there's not a detailed list, and it's strictly sort of categorized and grouped together on the expenditure report on the schedule of equipment as $613,000 operational expenses, telecommunications, et cetera. But then when you get to the supplemental police account, in item 6, we have detailed reports on every expenditure. And so I was hoping to see on item 5 where some of those expenditures, we say GPS tracking units, payment of informants, purchase narcotics, service for self devices, surveillance cameras, things like that. But it's all grouped together. It says those are miscellaneous operations, and $600,000 is a pretty large number for miscellaneous without having a detailed report. So if you can go through some of that.
Several years, we had a history prior. Oh, I'm sorry. Laura Luna.
It was actually, I'm sorry, item 7, which had the detailed.
Right, that's what's
right.
been purchased.
Correct.
During the quarter.
For the forfeiture. Okay.
Right.
Yes.
And it's all of asset forfeiture, not just the SPA money. What we've done is, several years ago, we did provide more detailed information, but it came to our attention actually through Narcotics Division that they wanted us to be a little bit more general, because a lot of the equipment that that they're buying, they don't want people knowing what they're buying, what's the technology that they're able to use in order to do their surveillance. A lot of the equipment that's funded through asset forfeiture is used for surveillance types activities, and since some of this money is also used for surveillance of department employees as part of our ethics enforcement, they certainly don't want people to know, okay, well, they're buying this technology and that technology, so I can turn around and have a way to be able to get around it. So they had asked us internally within the department to be a little bit more general in the type of equipment that they're buying. And even on the expenditure plan, or the expenses that we are providing in number 7, it's still fairly general in terms of it doesn't give specific information about technology, the type of technology that they're
right. I'm just looking for consistency. And if you look at item 7, for example, binoculars, body wire, car rentals,
right.
A drop safe, firearms equipment,
right.
Generators, things like that, they're not very, very specific.
No.
I mean, those are a little more detailed. So
there is a little bit more detail.
What I'm asking, if there's any way in the SPA account, if we can at least have some detail. It doesn't have to be specific. In GPS tracking units, I mean, we don't have to know, are those car-mounted, tight systems? Are they? There's still plenty of opportunity to not jeopardize operations with having some more detail. And so what I'd ask is, in future SPA reports that come back, that we have at least the detail we've got in the forfeiture asset account, and so we can see some of this information. The other part of this is, and one of the reasons I'm asking, is because we've got a lot of purchase orders that are out there right now, and this is really a matter for the Budget Committee. But in looking at a lot of this equipment, And looking at also, we've got, for example, an RFP on the street right now for new body armor. We've got that out, and I don't believe that we've looked at the economies of scale with body armor or other equipment purchases that we could utilize in other departments. In other words, LAXPD, the Port Police, General Services, so operations. Coupling all these things together, pooling them together, and going out citywide on an RFP and saying we can get a better price on a lot of this stuff if we partner with other departments that are utilizing a lot of the same equipment. And it's difficult as policymakers to make those decisions or instruct departments if we don't know what we're buying. And so as an example to that, I was using the body armor as an example, but I understand an RFP was just put out or is being written right now from the police department, but it's only for LAPD to replace body armor, while we've got three other police departments in the city that also utilize that equipment. And so those are the reasons I think we want to see the detail.
The body armor is part of a city contract that's led by GSD, and all of the departments that are under that General Services purchases for uses the same contract. We're currently in the process of adding some additional body armor to that contract, so it's really more of a bidding process rather than an RFP, because it's a citywide contract that we purchase off of.
So I'm using that as an example.
Okay.
But looking at citywide contracts, I mean, a lot, again, going back to some of these details would be helpful. Is there a way that in the future reports on the SPA account you can bring back some detail?
Okay, well,
as you have in forfeiture assets?
The SPA, the information that's provided that's under item number 7 includes both SPA expenditures and regular asset forfeiture expenditures. You've got a combination, because that's what the council direction was all asset forfeiture, and SPA is a subset of the asset forfeiture fund. So you've got...
So is it safe to assume that under that spreadsheet of $1,088,760, is that $600,000 roughly that was from SPA is included in that figure?
There are, these are expenditures from July through September. So these are prior year appropriations for this account. Item number 25 is using current year dollars, and it's for future expenditures. It's the plan for our future. This is from stuff that we have already been approved to purchase from prior years. And so a lot of it is the same kinds of things. We have to pay for the cell phone costs. We have to pay for the what do you call it when you're the pen and trap. So that we make a lot of those expenditures that are for surveillance purposes out of SPA.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of got a couple things going here.
Yeah, and that's why it's a little confusing.
It is.
Because
so
it's not...
we stayed on one item. Item number 5 is simply the expenditure plan for the $1.5 million that was identified in this year's budget for future expenditures. SPA is a subset of the overall asset forfeiture fund that we get $3 to $5 million a year, and then we have to come to council to get our expenditure plan approved.
Okay, but and then again, on the expenditure plan, then, is there a way to provide more detail than
Yes, we can do that.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes, we
on
can do that.
$1.5 million.
Yeah, when we come in for next year's, we will provide more detail on the types of expenditures without compromising their investigations.
Terrific. My colleagues, any questions?
I have a couple.
Okay, Mr. Zine.
Number 7, I received requests from West Valley Topanga for certain equipment such as ammunition generator, shotgun, and I'm trying to figure out how we can utilize some of this for some of our patrol functions. They've asked me with some of our funds if we would purchase this, and if we have available funds through the SPA or some other source, how we could assist those patrol divisions. Who would we work with, or who would they work with on that?
They would need to submit, we can't spend $1 unless it's been approved by the council.
I understand that,
Okay,
but is it only for narcotics, or is it for other?
It's primarily for the specialized divisions.
Now, what if a patrol division has specialized functions within that patrol division, and they need some of this equipment, because I was moving forward with purchasing some of this equipment that they said they couldn't get through the department. Then I see
Okay.
this,
Right.
which is exactly some of the stuff they're asking for.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out,
What they can do.
use those dollars to obviously help narcotics, but at
Right.
the same time, help those specialized operations within the division. For example, narcotics is now back to the divisions. So you've got, each patrol division has narcotics officers
Right.
working, they've decentralized that.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how we can help our personnel get the job done.
What we would need them to do is submit a request to Fiscal Operations Division for expenditures for future SPA plans. So for next year's money, we would need a request from the area to command
Goes to
officer.
FOD then.
Fiscal, yes.
Okay, and the next,
And then we get about $3 million worth of requests, and we have a budget of 1.5, so we go through all of it, and then we try to match what the need is, and then it runs up through the chain of command. We're not, we don't make the final decision about what we end up buying, and we try to look at also what we're able to cover through the general fund. And some of the things, like we have in the past bought specialized body armor for the patrol divisions out of asset forfeiture money, the tactical body
Right,
armor.
right.
And so there have been expenditures, but you're correct, most of the money does go towards the specialized divisions because of the source of funds and, the overall need for them having a need for so much specialized.
no, I understand, and I understand that completely, but when we take narcotics officers and put them back in patrol divisions, or
Right.
a patrol captain, and say, okay, now you're going to work this particular narcotics problem in the area,
Yeah.
it seems that we should be able to provide them with some of the equipment they're providing narcotics division, and they decentralized, I guess, and they still have the centralized operation. But I'm just trying to say, how do we take care of our personnel that need the
Yeah.
equipment?
Councilman Bill Hart, Captain at Gang and Narcotics Division. Just to reassure you, part of our mission at Gang and Narcotics Division is to support the areas, both narcotics enforcement and operations in general. And we do assist with equipment loans and, in the meantime, as Laura said, requests can be made for the future. But in the meantime, we are very supportive of NED operations throughout the city, and if there's a particular need, we'll do whatever we can to get the equipment to them that they need.
Well, I'll get a copy of that list to you that I've received, and then maybe some of that we could work together on to help them out.
Sure.
And the other question I have is the in-car digital video recorder system. I thought that we were using other funds to provide that.
That line item is part of our new and replacement vehicles, and so that money is being used on our existing fleet. I mean, the equipment that they're purchasing that for is part of our existing fleet, and it's a lot of repairs and things like that the motor transport needs to do on the existing stuff we already have. The purchase of the new stuff for each of the new in-car video phases
Right.
does come from the special fund.
All right, so this is the maintenance and other types.
Yeah.
All right. And asset forfeiture obviously is very precious. Hopefully, we can continue
Yes.
collecting those dollars. Thank you. That's all I have.
Quick question. For years, there's been an illegal dumping task force to catch illegal dumpers in South Los Angeles. And I know that they've relied very heavily over the years with the forfeited asset trust fund to be able to get cameras for video and surveillance, because it's very difficult to catch people who do that. So I just want to clarify this process. So if they want to pursue funding for their programs, and basically they have to submit a request, and it has to, include the proposal and how they intend to use it, and
Yeah, it's, which division, though, is that?
out of Newton.
Out of Newton. Yes, they would, the commanding officer would send me a correspondence requesting how much money they want, what its general purpose is, and also if we maintain a very detailed list of the kinds of things that they're purchasing, so the kinds of things that they're going to be able to, that they want to purchase. So,
So we have the foundation, we have this, other than general fund, what other funds we have so we can help our personnel within the police department?
Each account has each division has its own account as well. as a nonprofit.
Well, they got boosters and they got
Right,
those
those
other
kinds of things,
but-
right. They have all those. Those are not city money. The money that I'm aware of and that we administer is the asset forfeiture money in the general fund. Occasionally, there's grants, but that's under a different command that where they're able to buy equipment. Just depends on, how lucky they've been in obtaining grants.
And there's UWASA money.
Well, that's grant money.
That's correct.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, in looking at this, is what, do you have anything?
No.
In looking at this, it just appears to be what I'm going to call a slush fund, although it's critically important supplies for the department. There's not really a lot of oversight in this. We've got and a lot of it requires some explanation. $15,000 in car equipment, $225,000 or $222,000 in furniture. Don't know what that is. It's almost $6,000 in televisions, range fees. I'm not sure what fees we're paying. Travel and training. What I'd like to see is, do we have any parameters on the types of equipment and why perhaps some of these things aren't coming out of other types of accounts? In other words, this is sort of, without having a lot of details and the process on how it's approved and where the money goes, or what divisions it goes to, it almost seems like a lot of this should be considered a slush fund. But travel and training, $15,000, and are there any requirements or parameters on where and how this can and can't be spent?
All of this money is auditable, comes from through the federal government, and we're subject to any audit through DOJ. They have guidelines on how the money can be used. If there's any expenditure that is questionable or any request that's questionable that somebody wants to propose, we go back to DOJ and get in writing that it's an approved expenditure using asset forfeiture funds.
Mm-hmm.
What you have on this...
Has there been an audit of this?
There was an audit there's been an audit internally in the late 90s, the federal government came out and audited us. And they had several audit findings that were critical of how the funds were programmed. So we have been very strict now on how we program these funds to ensure that it isn't a slush fund, that we don't make inappropriate expenditures. But for the furniture and equipment for replacement facilities, when we built the new Parker Center, or not Parker Center, but the new police administration building, the city didn't have the funds to buy all of the stuff that couldn't be paid for out of MICLA, all the stuff that they say can shake out of the building, so furniture and those kinds of things. So the city, through the Schedule 3, which is part of the budget process, allocated funds. This is not SPA money now, this is regular asset forfeiture money, allocated funds to purchase all of the equipment for the new and replacement facilities that the city has been building. So some of these items, these large ticket items like the $222,000 was money that was spent for that, and that's asset forfeiture, that's not SPA. And in terms of like a lot of the equipment that's being bought here, we have a detailed list of what the divisions are purchasing. Those are approved through their chain of command, and so they are not allowed to go out and buy something different than what's on the plan. We won't let them purchase something that isn't an approved expenditure because we don't want to get a negative audit finding.
Now, as part of the audit, do they do equipment tracking as well? Do they verify what equipment was purchased and where that equipment is
Right,
still?
it has to be tagged appropriately. Yes.
It's tagged?
Yeah.
And was that part of that last audit or not? Or is just a audit from was it just an audit from DOJ to determine if the expenditures were made appropriately based on the allowance and what it can and can't be used for? Or was it in a comprehensive audit to spot check and look at where the equipment is?
No, I believe it was a comprehensive audit because there was some findings that the previous administrations, the portion that's Schedule 3, which is programmed in the budget process, there were some proposed expenditures that were made that were decided outside of the police department for how that money should be spent, and the DOJ came in and said, no, those are not appropriate expenditures. So that's why we're very, very careful, and we also spend a lot of time educating the CLA and the CAO and the mayor's office on appropriate expenditures, giving them the information that we get from DOJ about how this money can be spent.
Okay, I'm going to make the recommendation, we go ahead and move these files, but I will ask offline if, and unless any of my colleagues want it as well. I don't think it's necessary to come back to committee, but I'd like to see a copy of the last audit that was done, that you
Okay. It was in the late 90s.
discussed.
The
If
DOJ
you can-
audit.
If you can share that with my office.
Has the city done any audits? Other than the
Pardon
DOJ audit, has the city done any audits?
They audit subsets of this money, like, because we have a checking account for some of the expenditures, so they come in and audit our checking accounts.
Who's they? Who's they?
The controller.
All right.
Yeah.
And the department, they audit it also?
I can't recall whether there has been, but,
Because when there's that kind of money, people always
right,
ask questions.
right, right.
Not that any mistrusting, but it's just verified.
Right. Yeah, no, it's always a good thing to have that, and to get that kind of feedback so we can make improvements.
If you can share then both those audits you suggested.
Yeah. No, the one
You
that...
shared that the controller has done audits in the past too, if you can share
Yeah,
that.
I'll check
as
and
well,
see.
Please. Thank you.
Captain, do you do audits internal?
Pardon me?
Does the captain, that you have?
I personally review every SPA expenditure at Gang and Narcotics Division, and I get a monthly recap of what's been spent.
Okay.
Terrific. Okay. Any other questions?
Committee members, item 5, the CO report was submitted after the publication of the agenda. Do you wish to approve that report?
Yes.
With your added recommendation for the police department to report in future expenditure plans with more detail on those plans. Number 6 will be a note and file action.
Yes.
And 7, receive and file. Thank you.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Okay.